The shattering veil the veil held, and yet the field did not know it. Sound kept running a few steps past silence, a cart whose driver had fallen asleep and woken only when the wheel pressed against his ribs. The last filaments of the lattice bled back into the earth in slow threads. Dust hung in place like breath that refused to leave the mouth that made it. A curl of singed grass turned black and then green and then black again before admitting at last that the moment had passed. Liang lowered his arms and discovered they did not wish to be lowered. He set them down the way you set down jars that have just come out of a kiln, with care and a reluctance to learn whether they have hairline cracks inside. His legs shook and then refused to shake because they had spent all their coin for the day. Zhao Ren leaned forward with his palms on his thighs and laughed once in a way that did not sound like joy or mockery, but like a man who has been spared and knows he does not deserve it more than the next soul. Around them, disciples remembered their names. Some wept without sound, the tears running clean tracks through the grit on their faces. Some looked for a place to sit and found there was only the ground, and so sat there as if they had meant to honor the earth in just that way. Shenlan slid down the inside of the wall and closed her eyes the way you close a book you will open again. Mu Qiu sagged beside her and whispered thank you to no one that anyone could see. Han Ye pounded Jian Du on the back hard enough to make him cough until he laughed, then hauled him up with both hands. The air smelled of cold iron and pine sap and that faint sweetness that comes when stormlight withdraws from a field of bruised grass. The rift left a black smear across the inside of the eyes of every person who had looked into it too long. When they blinked, they saw that smear try to stay. When they did not blink, they saw it anyway and wished they had. Elder Jian lifted his staff from the earth. The mark it had made did not vanish. It remained as a circle the size of a man's shield, the carved wood having spoken a word the ground had agreed to remember. He stood within it for the space of 10 slow breaths, not drawing on it, not giving to it, as if polite company had to be observed even between elder and soil. When he stepped out, the circle dimmed and waited for whatever the day would ask of it next. Carry your wounded, he said. Bring the fallen. Gather what fragments have sense. Leave what would only trouble memory. The orders were ordinary. Ordinary words are blankets after storms. People held them and found that they could fold their minds again into shapes that worsened nothing. Cai began assigning pairs with a point of the staff and a name. The stewards ran as men run who have promised their bread to a god of hard work. Inner disciples took the parapet again in a line that looked like stitches. The apothecaries arrived with slings and oil and a smell of bruised mint. Liang bent to the ground that had not stopped being ground and found a core 2 fingers wide tucked in a crack between 2 stones. It was more pebble than treasure, and yet it pulsed at the edge of sight. He wrapped it in a strip of cloth from his sleeve and tied the knot so that it could not fall free if his hands learned to forget they were hands. Zhao fetched another with his left hand and did not wince when the edge bit his palm, though blood rose bright and tidy and ran into the creases of his grip like ink. They carried a boy whose ankle had folded under him and who kept asking where his shoe had gone, as if that were the worst of his losses. They lifted a girl whose hair had caught fire at the very ends and who would not let anyone cut the singed length because it had belonged to her when the morning began and she did not see why the day should be allowed to take it. They found the one taken by the shadow limb. There was nothing to carry. Cai made no speech. He put his staff to the ground once beside the place where it had happened and then turned to arrange what could still be arranged. The sparrow that had perched near Liang had flown at the moment of silence and was nowhere now. Liang felt its absence the way you feel a word leave your mouth and hover above you while you wait to learn whether it will be admitted into the sentence that follows. Elder Jian had seen the bird. He had looked at it with the same gaze he turned on cracks in walls and the faces of strangers carrying old marks. Liang had seen that look and did not know whether to guard the bird in his memory or dig a small hole in the dirt of his mind and hide the memory there. When the field had nothing left that could be improved by staying, they began the slow climb back to the gate. The sun had begun to go down one shoulder. It had an old tired light, the kind that says I will leave without apology and return without explanation and you will be glad for both. The stone steps held the voices of the day in their grooves. Boots scuffed them up. Palms slid along the low wall where hands had learned to trust both stone and splinter. On the parapet, the ward sigils pulsed like sleeping animals. They would wake if called. They would complain if asked to rise too soon. They had learned something about the size of the mouth pressed against them. The inner disciples fed the last of the cores into a bowl of carved slate. The light drank and dimmed and drank again, greed and caution taking turns. Inside the gate, the courtyard had become a room that wanted to be a shrine and did not know how. People spoke more softly than before. They bowed to each other almost by accident. A boy whose usual habit was to snatch the last dumpling from a bowl caught himself and set the last dumpling on a plate for someone who had bled more. A girl who hated the way water made her sleeves cling carried a jar from the well to the washyard and did not shake off the drops that ran down to her elbows. The elders took the center of the space as the day allowed. Jian stood with Cai to his left and an apothecary of 30 winters to his right, her hands red from work, her mouth already shaping instructions for the next task. The old librarian had come up from the books though he had not been asked to. He stood at the edge where shadow meets lit stone and looked at Liang the way a man looks at a page that he had copied long ago and has just discovered was spelled rightly. You breathed when counting was not enough, Cai said to the gathered peers. You counted when breath would not agree to be one body. You did not break. His eyes passed over Shenlan and the quiet satisfaction on her mouth, over Muqiu and the wild tremor still in her fingers, over Hanya and Qiandu and the way their shoulders leaned without asking permission. He found Zhao and found Liang last and the staff dipped a hair in what might have been the smallest of bows. Jian's voice carried without effort. The veil holds. For now, it holds because you chose to be tied to it for the length of time required and you did not argue with the knot. You felt the weight of a door that wanted to swing inward and you set your backs against it and remembered your names. He let the sentence rest as if he had placed a cup too hot to drink on a table. There is more to say and none of it will be said at this hour. Eat your rice. Wash your hands. Bind your cuts. Sleep if sleep will have you. Those who cannot sleep will report to the night watch. Those who dream will bring the dreams to the library before midday. A breach has a mind. It will try to speak in sleep. The librarian inclined his head once and his milky eyes sharpened like glass held to flame. We will write what needs to be written, he said, and Liang felt a strange relief at the idea that words might be persuaded to hold the edges of the day. Elder Jian's gaze touched Liang again as light touches a blade before a craftsman sets it back in oil. You will present yourself in the morning, he said. You and your partner. A thing looked at in daylight is a thing that learns what it is for. Zhao's mouth twitched as if he wanted to smile and could not find where he had put it. Liang bowed and did not trust his voice to act like a voice. People drifted away without haste. The steward set out bowls of broth that remembered ginger and garlic and the bones of something that had run in a field once and had not wished to be soup but had agreed in the end. Liang ate as a man eats when he must remind his hands what hands are for. Zhao ate more quickly and then sat with his empty bowl between his knees and stared at the place where steam had been. Muqiu tucked her hair behind her ear and laughed with Shenlan at nothing. The laugh sounded like ash being swept from a hearth. When the bowls were clean and the talk had drawn down to murmurs, Liang walked the path to his quarters. The lamp inside had been filled by someone with gentler hands than his. The wick caught and held. The silver fang lay where he had left it. If you want us to keep making more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Azure Inkblade. Now, back to the chapter. The core he had brought from the field warmed a thumb's breadth of the table. The sparrow was not on the sill. The window looked out at the last color of evening and the first matter of night. He washed his hands and watched the water turn from pink to clear. He bound a shallow cut across his forearm with the cheap cloth that every outer disciple owns and thinks is rubbish until a day like this one arrives and proves it is salvation. He sat cross-legged and let his breath come low and steady, a boat on a slow river that has decided not to race anymore. The ember inside him had changed. It had spent and grown. He felt its edges touch the walls of his dungeon as if checking where the room ended. It did not pound. It did not boast. It pulsed like a jaw that has learned the measure of the food it must chew. He let attention move through the pathways down his arms and up his back and along the line of his spine. In places the flow stuttered as water stutters when it meets pebbles. In places it ran quick and smooth, commending his foolishness for teaching it a song while the ground tried to open. He closed his eyes and saw the rift again and decided not to open them. He watched the smear in his vision try to decide whether it would be ghost or memory and then watched it choose to be neither. He watched the sparrow land on the broken stake. He watched it not speaking a word he could hear, and yet speaking in a language that the ember understood. Every choice devours the rest. He let the sentence arrive and did not push it away. He let it sit beside him as if it had paid for the cushion with old coins. There were choices in a row before him, no longer threads that demanded all possible futures be known, but stones set in a path that asked only for a foot to be placed or not placed. He could go to Zhao's door and knock and find what sort of talk would come out of the boy whose grin had looked like a wound that was finally ready to be stitched. He could go to the library and sit under the lamps and ask how words catch dreams that do not wish to be held. He could sleep with the lamp lit and wake when oil failed. He could spend the night moving breath through the form until his legs learned a truth he did not yet know. He stood. He took the core from the table and wrapped it with the fang in a cloth and tucked them into the low drawer where a small jade token rested, the one Elder Mo had given him on the day he had first crossed the gate into this place that had since tried to make him a disciple instead of a visitor. He tightened the knot and then loosened it and then tightened it again without knowing why that felt like a prayer. He left the room and walked the corridor. It was quiet the way corridors are quiet when they know feet will come again soon. At the turn that led toward the library he hesitated without shame. At the turn that led to Zhao's door he paused again and listened and heard a breath that did not belong to him. It was uneven but not angry. He let the pause become a step away. He took the path to the wall instead. The night air held a coolness that made the lungs honest. The ward line along the parapet now glowed in a way that did not ask to be admired. It was work light. It was the flame in a kitchen where morning porridge will be made whether anyone likes porridge or not. A watchman nodded to Liang and did not ask why he had come. He stood where he had stood a dozen times and put both hands on the stone and felt the mountain through it, the way you feel a horse through leather when your legs have forgotten fear. Beyond the wall the land did what land does when it has just been threatened. It waited for a sound that would mean it had to run again and then, not hearing it, it began the slow work of remembering where the rain had left its last secret. Something moved to his left. He did not start. He turned and saw Elder Jian not 3 paces away. The elder did not stand like a statue. He stood like a man who has learned the art of not leaning while still letting tired bones rest in their house. The staff rested across his forearms, one hand draped over the carved head as if it were a thing that liked to be petted. "You spoke like a bell," Jian said without looking at him. "When others' breath ran in the street, yours found a step." Liang swallowed once to be sure his throat would honor his reply. "It was only a count." "Only is a word we use when a thing frightens us with its simplicity," Jian said. "Only a door. Only a roof. Only a line in the earth that says here and there. You have a count that others can hear. Guard it. Do not make a habit of spending it on the price of pride." The elder's gaze turned then and met Liang's as if the staff had told it to. "That bird," he said. "It came when your ember would have gone out." "You saw it?" "I did," Liang answered. "It is not of the woods," Jian said. "It is not of the wall. It is not of the elders. It is not of them either. If it follows you, do not follow it in return without asking which parts of you it wants. A gift has hands." Liang felt the spiral under his ribs and knew it had warmed at the sight of that small shape. He did not pretend he had not noticed. "It spoke without words," he said. Jian's mouth made the shape of a smile without moving enough to be one. Most things worth hearing do, he said. Rest, Liang. The mountain believes in tomorrow. We will insult it if we pretend we do not. The elder left with a step that understood the courtesy owed to stone. Liang stayed until the watchman coughed to be kind and remind him that the night would do its work whether he watched or not. He returned to his bed and slept the way bodies sleep when they have been wrung and hung and blessed with the chance to be folded back into their own shape. Dawn came with the sky rinsed clean. The gong sounded and the sound went into the new day as if it were the first time a hand had ever struck bronze with a stick. Liang rose and ate what was offered and bowed at the right moments and took his place on the platform beside Zhao Ren. Cai's staff ticked the stone. The pairs formed their lines. Shen Lan met his eyes and nodded once, and Mu Qiu gave him a crooked grin that said, "We breathed, did we not?" Han Ye slapped Qian Du on the shoulder and the two of them stood a hair closer than they had before the night taught them respect. Elder Jian came late. He moved as if he had always been there and had decided only now to show himself. He looked down the line and then at the wall and then at the mountain and then at the smallest of the outer disciples whose hands were still too soft for the posts and whose eyes were trying to learn how to hold size. He grounded his staff and the day welcomed it. "Twin branches is a form you will return to when you are proud," he said. "It is the cure for that sickness. Yesterday you learned the form of many branches. You may think that will be your work from now until hunger takes you. It will not. Your work will be to hold the single form and the many at once without deciding that one makes you special." He lifted the staff and drew a slow curve through the air that every person there felt along the inside of the wrist. "We begin again," he said. They began. The stance was the same as it had been before their bones had learned what the dark could do. The bridge felt different because their forearms remembered the weight of a claw they had never truly touched. The breath came on the first count or the second or the third, but when it came with a quiet that did not need to prove anything. Liang moved and did not chase the tone. He let it arrive in the room between his chest and Zhao's and did not grab it when it did. He felt the ember accept instruction from his feet. He felt the spiral at his sternum listen without arguing. He bent and rose and cut. When the air touched his cheek it did not surprise him. When dust curled at their feet he did not say to himself, "I did that." He said to himself, "We did not forget." When Cai called a halt, Liang looked up and saw the sparrow on the eave. It did not tilt its head. It watched him with that look that knows how to make a man feel both seen and measured. It spoke in that unvoiced way again, and he heard it because the day had taught him how to listen without demanding a tongue. Every choice devours the rest. He nodded once, to say that he heard and that he would do his best to spend choices with respect. The bird lifted, a stitch in the morning, and flew toward the library as if it had remembered an appointment it meant to keep. Liang watched it go and felt the quiet certainty of a path, not blazing, not grand, but firm underfoot. He set his stance when Cai called for the next sequence. He raised his forearm and met Zhao's with light contact. He breathed in when the count said 1 and let it go when the count said 2. He let his palms fall together when 4 arrived, and the cut that came was not a shout. It was a door closing with care. The kind you hear from the next room that lets you know the house will keep you through the night.